Hello and welcome to the BNP Paribas Asset Management Talking Heads podcast. Every week, Talking Heads will bring you in-depth insights and analysis through the lens of sustainability on the topics that really matter to investors. In this episode, we'll be discussing the outcome of the recent United Nations Climate Summit, better known as COP29, which was held in Azerbaijan. I'm Andy Craig, co-head of the Investment Insight Centre, and I'm joined by Thibaut Clisson, who is Climate Change Lead in our Sustainability Centre. Welcome, Thibaut.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good to be here.
COP29 is now over, but so far the reactions to the outcome have been quite mixed. What are your takeaways from COP29?
COP29 was not that successful and has left many stakeholders unsatisfied. It's fair to say that there were some improvement and announcements, so it's not a complete failure. Several stakeholders have said that a bad deal is maybe better than no deal at all. This is exactly where we are right now. There was some clear improvement on Article 6 that has been waited for since 2015, which now provide more visibility on carbon markets. The key question going forward will be, will those improvements be enough to restore confidence and integrity on voluntary carbon markets? Without going too much into the details, there is two components on the Article 6, one of the Paris Agreement, which is linked to the exchange of carbon credits between countries, and another one between companies and countries, the so-called Article 6.4. On this part, I'm still cautious. I believe it still opens the door for misleading practices for private sectors, but all in all, Article 6 was needed and will allow more money to go where it is clearly needed, to developing countries and to climate mitigation and adaptation projects and nature conservation. So that was one of the main outcomes. The other one was the main goal of this COP, what we call the new collective quantified goal, the NCQG, which replaced the former commitment from developed countries to allocate $100 billion to developing countries. The outcome is below expectations because we're talking about $300 billion per annum, while some stakeholders were expecting something like $1.3 trillion. The deal is not really satisfactory for anyone. Basically, developed countries wanted to expand contributing countries to China and Saudi Arabia, and also to allow for private contributions to be accounted for. On the other side, developing countries wanted more money. So the deal is a good basis for next year's COP discussions. It's a floor. It leaves the door open for voluntary contributions by other countries. Another important component is seeking to bring this $300 million commitment to $1.3 billion. There will be a lot of discussions in the next month on how to increase this amount of money, how to channel more money to developing countries, and the interest rate that developing countries need to pay for green projects. A representative of the Brazilian government highlighted that developing a renewable project in Brazil is twice as expensive in terms of interest rate. This will need to be addressed. There were also other announcements which are good to have in mind. A commitment on methane. 30 countries promised to set up targets to focus on reducing methane emissions from organic waste. The other one is on food. The Baku Harmonia Climate Initiative, which is targeting farmers. The idea is to combine and streamline the flows of information around climate actions for farmers. I think the two first improvements, Article 6 and the new collective quantified goals, even if below expectations, are still something that we can work on. And as mentioned, a bad deal is better than no deal at all.
Yeah, because there were fears at one stage there would be no deal at all. So there's been some progress, and the focus now will be on next year's COP30 in Brazil. What do you think will be the key topics next year?
First, February 2025, countries need to announce their 2035 emission reduction targets. We hope all of the parties will announce their reduction targets by then, and then there will be a lot of discussions around how those NDCs are sufficiently ambitious or not. The other big topic will be the loss and damage discussions. Last year, during COP, the launch of the Loss and Damage Fund was announced, but no progress have been made, especially during this COP. So the question on how to raise money to help nations to deal with the loss and damage caused by climate-related disasters is still completely unanswered. And this will be one of the key discussions going forward. The other big topic is adaptations. There were a lot of discussions during this COP on adaptations. They announced the launch of the Baku Adaptation Roadmap, but to be honest, very little progress is achieved. And clearly more work needs to be done in the coming months on developing indicators to track how the global goal on adaptation will be implemented and on the development of national adaptation plans. The last point is what we call the global stocktake. Last year, there were pledges on transitioning away from fossil fuels. Even if the wording was quite blurred, it was a key achievement of the last COP. This year, no mention was made to this pledge. So next COP, we need to address how we track the implementation of that pledge. So for me, that's the four main topics that will be key to track for the next COP in Brazil.
Sounds like there's quite a lot to keep an eye on. If we come back to COP29, how do you think the outcome of COP29 is going to impact asset managers or the companies that they invest in?
The two main outcomes of the COP, the Baku to Belém roadmap and the Article 6 improvements, could impact the private sectors. If we look at the Baku to Belém roadmap, this is the initiative that is seeking to bring the $300 million committed this year to $1.3 billion, which is what is really needed to finance climate change mitigation and adaptation. We need to find almost $1 billion per year of additional commitments and money. I don't think this money will come from the public sector. The private sector will be needed. Companies will be subject to pressure to increase their contributions to finance the energy transition in developing countries. Regarding Article 6.4, which is more specific to the exchange of carbon credit between countries and corporates, I think will be quite interesting to look at because the voluntary carbon markets have not been that appealing over the last couple of years, especially the last 2 years. So maybe what has been announced could provide more clarity and more appetite for a voluntary carbon market.
Okay, so the other event which potentially is going to have an influence on the negotiations is the election of Donald Trump in the US. There is already discussion about the potential withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement, which set the goal of cutting global greenhouse gas emissions to limit global temperature increases to as close as possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, as I say, there's a lot of discussion about the possibility of withdrawing from that agreement. What would that mean, Thibault, for future climate negotiations?
As the US is still the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in absolute terms and historically speaking, the major contributor to global warming, if the US effectively leaves the Paris Agreement, it's clearly not a good sign. It would act as a signal for other countries to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. This did not happen last time the US withdrew from the Paris Agreement, but you never know. But maybe this could be the starting point of a broader reshaping of the power dynamics in climate negotiations. The key question will be, is China willing to play a stronger role? Over the last years, China has substantially increased its leadership on most of the green and low-tech technologies, and they control most of the supply chain of raw materials, which are key for the energy transition. You could ask yourself the question if they will be tempted to expand their technological leadership towards a more political leadership. The other question is Brazil. Brazil will be the host of the next COP. They are one of the key members of the so-called BRICS. They could also be tempted to play a bigger role in climate negotiation and be the voice of the developing countries. So the election of Trump and the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement could be translated into a complete reshaping of climate negotiations and having the developing countries playing a much bigger role and a much more proactive role than they have done in the past.
Well, thank you, Thibault. That's very helpful in updating us on where we are on this long and winding road towards the energy transition. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Andy, and it was a pleasure.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Talking Heads. If you'd like more information about how we integrate the potential impact of climate change into our investment decision-making and portfolio management, please reach out to your BNP Paribas Asset Management contact or check out Viewpoint, our website for investment insights at viewpoint.bnpparibas-am.com. You've been listening to the BNP Paribas Asset Management Talking Heads podcast with me, Andy Craig, and Thibault Clisson, climate change lead with BNP Paribas Asset Management's Sustainability Centre. Please do join us again next week. Until then, take care.
This presentation includes a discussion on current market events and is not intended as investment advice or an offer of products or services by BNP Paribas Asset Management. Please keep in mind that the information and analysis in this presentation is only current as of the publication date.